religious leaders and scholars of religion as well, who are giving attention to the question, what can religion and religious networks and religious peoples uniquely bring to these issues of human flourishing that are facing us as a collective society. And while on the one hand I'm a little bit skeptical of these big photo op forums, it does help to at least articulate a sense of common purpose. And in these forums there are really, I think, seeds get planted for different types of collaborations, and the fact that in a world where, and sometimes religion gets the negative connotations because it stirs up violence and sectarian identities, et cetera, it's also wonderful to see a rather prominent group of people coming together to articulate exactly what religion, religious people, religious networks can contribute to the very real problems that are facing us. And I've moved from this global scale, and I wanted to move here to the local scale. So this is in Omaha, which must be close to here, although I'm not exactly sure in what direction or how far. So this is a wonderful project where a Muslim community, a Christian community, a Jewish community, and an interfaith center have co-located on a piece of property, and right in the middle of their different centers is this wonderful garden, which has a number of functions. One, just to give people organic opportunities to interact with one another. It sources the local food pantries, and it serves as this metaphorical place of kind of flourishing together. And so this is another fascinating example of congregations coming together, literally building together for the common good. So it's called the Tri-Faith Initiative, and I know the Pluralism Project at Harvard University is another sort of such center that has now almost probably 30 years at this point been trying to not only push forward a dialogue, but has also been trying to document what has been happening around the country, around the US specifically in this area. So we have so many initiatives like the one we're benefiting from right now that have long pushed this agenda of collaboration forward. Now, I've said it before, but I'll say it again, is that we're working against also networks, formal, informal, of people who would rather see a splintered, fractured, homogenous national identity. And we've seen this through January 6th in so many ways, that it is more powerful than maybe previously people were willing to openly acknowledge. And so the impetus, on the one hand, it's urgent to kind of create counter narratives, and at the same time, it's both urgent and it's, as I mentioned before, perpetual. So we're between the sense that this has always been a pattern in human history, and this is very poignant at our current time and place. So another program I wanted to call your attention to, because it has fantastic resources, is out of Harvard Divinity School, called the Religion, Conflict, and Peace Initiative. And this program is explicitly thinking about the ways in which religious networks can contribute to conflict resolution, mostly political conflict resolution. They have fantastic webinars, so if this is an area of your interest, definitely plug into their networks. And I do work occasionally out at Harvard Divinity School, so I have to, I think, in good faith, disclose that I am a Harvard Divinity School affiliate, but I would recommend this program to you, even if I weren't. So this is another photo that comes out of the book project. Not that it was it was one I curated as part of the book project from a photographer who uses photography as a medium for bringing together communities across divides. So Saskia Keeley has taken her longtime professional interest in photography and thought about how she could bring that into both conflict resolution and an interfaith dialogue. And so these are two participants in a dialogue in which they track each other throughout the day and into their home lives and spaces and photograph each other and curate a collection based on this more intimate viewing. And if you think about the courage, for instance, for women, this was a particular program for the women to participate in this program, many of them, I'm sure, had to go against the suspicion of maybe their families, their wider societies, in order to take part in this project. And I put this up here, both to show you this fascinating work, but just to say there's always this sort of third space. Like, what is it that you do and that you love doing, and how can that be a vehicle for interacting across faith lines? There's another piece of protest art by a young Palestinian who's studying to be an architect, who is focused on designing refugee settlements that are dignified, that are pragmatic. And another example of someone who is thinking out of their professional lens how to make a difference and draw people together. And this is a demonstration that he and a colleague did in the DC Metro. You'll remember that there was a time, thankfully we haven't had any instances of this that I know of lately, where there were a number of people being pushed into the subway tracks for their supposed identities. And oftentimes, that the people who bear the brunt of this tend to even be from the Sikh community, because people mistake them for Muslims. So that's a particular way. And I should take the time now to just say the work of the Sikh Coalition of America has been phenomenal, because their response was not, don't harm us, we're not Muslim. The response has been, well, we'll educate you, we're Sikhs, it's a different religion than Islam, but while we're at it, let's put forth a whole anti-bigotry platform. So it's a great example of a community not only acting out of its own self-interest, but acting out of the question of what can we contribute to this problem. In the book, I have a sermon by Rabbi Michelle Dardashi, who's an Iranian rabbi. She was a longtime rabbi at Brown and now serves an independent foundation. And I was so inspired by her speech at the Rhode Island State House when the so-called Muslim ban legislation went into effect. She was out there protesting and had this really poignant way of drawing together Jewish tropes about the Exodus, kind of the let my people out, and she took it and turned it into a speech where the refrain was let my people in, sort of as an Iranian person of Jewish background. So I put this up here to say these layers of our identity, in what ways do they allow us to be in solidarity, or to give us a voice? In what ways can we draw on our platform to stand up for others who might not be our identity group, but might be being disadvantaged in a way? Audre Lorde, another of my personal heroes, is someone who has really called out the way class functions, and this is, when we do interfaith work, a lot of times this is the identity label that gets the least amount of exploration, and in some cases, I think at least in the academic venues that I tend to run in. And I didn't put a slide up for it here, but I wanted to highlight a project coming out of Hebrew College and their Miller Center of Interreligious Learning and Leadership. And they've partnered, drawing together a group of youth across the Boston area, and formed a COVID, and this is now 2 years running, formed a COVID coalition where the youth across all different religious and non-religious backgrounds were working together across their different community lines. And so it's an example of a way in which they were tackling issues of access to care that very much fell along class lines, and simultaneously we're able to use the issues of the day and that to tackle anti-Black to tackle anti-Black bigotries and simultaneously think about the COVID crisis. So it's an example of a program, I'm sad I didn't put a slide up here, I have to remember to add it, that is looking intersectionally at the many ways that people have both advantage and disadvantage. So it brought together kids from the wealthy suburbs of Newton, for instance, with students who come from a background where it was much more difficult for them to be able to participate in interreligious activities. And the pioneering aspect, I think, one of the pioneering aspects of that program is that they, after successful participation in the program, and even partway through, I think the students received stipends. So it was actually putting an economic incentive to letting these teenagers step out across their bounds. So instead of having to get jobs at maybe places that were simple retail locations where they couldn't be as effective on social issues, it was really taking seriously training youth for how to, one, do cross-cultural work and how to be change agents in their local communities. So just a really, really excellent program. And of course, speaking on the power of the moral voice within our religious communities, of course, the Poor People's Campaign that has been doing such tremendous work, and that comes in many ways out of a Christian framing and Christian leadership, but is, I think, aspiring to be a much wider. I live very close to the Walden area and the Concord area, and so I want to say that these issues, again, they're not new issues, but we have, in our time, we can keep continuing to think creatively how we work across our alliances to push people out of their comfort zones. And the climate is, of course, one issue I've only just slightly mentioned, but we have tremendous resources within each faith tradition. I think here of the Jains, who are probably the most of all our traditions. Maybe Native peoples and Jains are probably have the most to teach us about actually putting our values into practice in terms of stewarding the planet and being better co-inhabitants with the non-human species. So I just want to, maybe I'll go a little bit faster here. These are modalities for exchange. This is an Eid festival from the time when I worked at Tufts, from one of the Tufts photographers, and participating in each other's religious observances in ways that are appropriate is such a beautiful kind of first step, I think, to opening some doors. So, given that it is Ramadan and there's an opportunity tomorrow, I think it's a natural point to put another plug for the event happening tomorrow. And although I don't know this particular mosque community yet, I'm going to send you to Ahmed right here in the audience who can be a friendly face if anyone should attend tomorrow at the masjid. This happens to be the Islamic Society of Boston Cultural Center, and this was right in the wake, this photo is taken right in the wake of the November 2016 elections, which were so very fraught. And the mosque, in collaboration with interfaith partners from Hebrew College and the other Jewish and Christian and wider interfaith networks in the Boston area, drew together an explicit platform in the mosque for recognizing and affirming our different political identities. And it was a fascinating place in which there were speakers of different, here you tend to see our very democratic representation in Massachusetts, but there were people from across the political spectrum. So how very fascinating to have the mosque be this place of deliberate political, cross-party political dialogue. Seems very, could go very wrong, but thankfully this for most accounts, I think went very well. Now this is a bit more, we have to give this a bit more thought. Maybe it's a good place for, I can transition in 3 slides into the question and answer. but what is the role of experiencing one another's spiritual practices? Sometimes it's appropriate, sometimes it's not appropriate. And this, where it's appropriate, I think it's a wonderful way in which to delve into a different modality of understanding, move out of the intellectual conceptual space and again into those embodied practices that are so very central to many of our traditions. I wanted to put a plug here for the Journal Interreligious Studies. That's an open access platform. Now it's indexed and it's a very global in scope forum for the nexus of practice and dialogue. So fascinating issues here, and again, all open access. So you can go right to their website and read about all types of interreligious efforts all around the world, really. And as well as deep theoretical pieces that question, what are we doing? What are we about? What are we up to? And finally, I'll say in my own work, although my first monograph is on the Quran, and it's very Quran-centric in that way, throughout the whole process, given that the scriptures of the Hebrew scriptures and the Christian scriptures have so many parallels to the Quran, including many shared figures, and that's the theme of my talk on Saturday evening, is some of those shared figures. But I was in dialogue with both biblical scholars and rabbis and Christian theologians and all throughout the project, and it personally always enriches my own understanding of the Quran, not only because there's so much similarity in the scriptures, but also because the fundamental questions that animate are so similar in many respects. Many people are curious about my own background, so I did put up here, this is an interview that I did that you're welcome to read online about some of my mentors in getting into the space of interreligious dialogue. And one of those happens to be Ibu Patel, who runs an organization that's now called Interfaith America, and they are the largest interfaith organization in the US, or in North America even. And so if you're looking for further resources, Interfaith America is another great place. I'm seeing many nodding heads, so that might not be new information. But thank you so much. I put my email up here. I really do appreciate hearing from people what projects you're working on and what your aspirations are. So I'll break now for the question and answer, and thank you so much for your attention.
The challenges that
Do you want to also, if you feel comfortable, feel free to introduce yourself too, given that this is a forum in which hopefully you will all cross paths again. It's always nice to put a name or...
Sure. My name is Heather Branstetter. I just moved to Perry about a year and a half ago, so I've been enjoying being in the Lawrence, Kansas area and meeting new friends. Now I need to go back to my question. Where am I at? With your work, one of the things that I've noticed, especially when we're working across religious ideology and religious cross-culturally, that I find that politics starts to come into that interplay. We don't want to have these conversations about religion because it's political. We don't want to have, and yet it seems to me that all of those identities that we have, like you had mentioned, start pulling in some of these political ideas. And I was wondering if you've experienced that in your work across diversity and equity, and how you are able to overcome that dialogue and let it just be that we're having a human conversation and trying to bring us all together as a human being.
Exactly, that's such a profound insight. And I think it's so important to have great moderation of events. And that really is, I think, the role of the moderator, not only in the event itself, but also the parties who have framed the event. You know, what is this event for? right? Maybe it's for discussing politics, in which case, here's the guidelines, right? And the question of this framing, what are we here for? And then the question of the moderator, because the moderator can always say, interject and intervene and say, I hear you saying that this, and when we convened today, we agreed that this dialogue would be about this, and so even, who's the moderator really matters too, because it's that, right, that place of the person has to both have a gentle hand but also have authority in the space, and so there's certainly an art to that role of moderation as well. And I think that there's spaces to put aside certain identities and to come in to only focus on maybe one nexus, and then there's spaces where you really want to bring it all, bring everything you carry, and each kind of has different program outcomes, but potentially. Essential Partners is one organization that I think does this really well. They're Boston-based. Again, a lot of my examples are Boston-based because these are the people I get a chance to work with. They have wonderful activities where people will say, this is like a moving in type of activity into the space, an icebreaker, as you will, asking individuals to say, as a blank, I think that people perceive me as blank, because, and to really hear what, people name the stereotypes that they perceive, and it could be something as simple as a natural blonde, as a blonde by choice, I feel that this group of people might perceive this about me. And so you can know that stereotypes are out there, but to name it in a space, to articulate it for yourself, and then to also listen deeply as other people are articulating. And then the second step of that exercise, again, this is by Essential Partners. The second step is that people will name, do they find this stereotype amusing, hurtful? Is it something that is enraging? Sort of how do they orient to this perceived stereotype? And then you also say, as a part of this exercise, how accurate is it? Because some stereotypes they build off some kernel of they build off something. So that's another way to let people speak about their own experiences in communities in a way that is maybe gets at the harmfulness of essentializing, while also kind of recognizing some of the dynamics that are at play. Yeah, good facilitation, good planning. Right, yeah.
That's my job.
That's exactly.
I didn't do it for your job, that's why I wanted to moderator.
My name is Deacon. I'm a pastor at a church